You touched your face 11 times in the last hour. You probably don't remember any of them. A quick rub of the eye, a finger against the lip, a palm pressed to the cheek while you were thinking. 11 times, completely unconsciously, your hands made contact with the most vulnerable entry points on your body. Now imagine you could see what was on those hands. Not with a microscope, not in a lab, just with your own eyes right now in real time. Every surface crawling, every handle, every screen, every coin, every handshake leaving a visible trail behind it. Most people assume they would become cleaner, more careful, better. They would not. And the reason why is one of the strangest things science has ever discovered about the human mind. Right now, on your skin alone, there are approximately 1.5 trillion microorganisms. That number is so large it is essentially meaningless. So here is a better way to think about it. If every microbe on your body were the size of a grain of sand, you would be buried under a dune roughly the height of a 4-story building. Most of them are not trying to harm you. Most of them are doing the opposite. Your gut microbiome alone contains around 38 trillion bacteria, and without them, you could not digest food, regulate your immune system, or produce several of the neurotransmitters your brain depends on to function. The microbiologist Julia Enders spent years documenting exactly this, that the bacteria living inside you are not invaders, they are infrastructure, but you would not see that distinction. If you could see every microbe, you would see everything equally. The harmless and the dangerous, the essential and the threatening, a cloud of organisms on every surface, every person, every breath hanging in the air in front of you. And the human brain, presented with a visible threat it cannot evaluate, does not think. It panics. Hour 1. Within the first hour, handshakes would stop globally, not by agreement or government instruction, just by instinct. The moment you could see what transferred between 2 palms in a single handshake, or somewhere between 10 million and 1 billion bacteria depending on the study, nobody would reach out first. Door handles would become impassable. A visibly colonized surface that hundreds of hands had touched would trigger the same instinctive recoil as a physical obstacle. Buildings would start to empty as people found reasons not to touch anything they didn't have to. And then something more interesting would happen. People would look at each other differently. Every person you passed would be visibly surrounded by their own microbial cloud, the unique bacterial signature that each human body constantly sheds into the air around it. Researchers at the University of Oregon found that humans shed so many microbes that a person can be identified from the bacteria left in a room after just a few hours, the way a dog identifies a scent. You would not just see germs, you would see people as sources of germs, and that shift from person to biological hazard would change everything about how human beings interact within the first 60 minutes. Day 1, public transport would collapse by morning. Not because of a government order, because nobody would board a bus or a train voluntarily once they could see what a sealed metal tube containing 80 warm human bodies actually looks like from a microbial perspective. The air itself would appear thick with exhaled particles. Every seat, every pole, every window would be visibly alive. Cities built on the assumption that humans would share space would suddenly feel uninhabitable. And here is where the science becomes genuinely counterintuitive. The places that looked the cleanest would not be the safest. Researchers studying hospital environments found that sterile, aggressively cleaned spaces often harbor more dangerous bacteria than ordinary environments because cleaning eliminates the harmless competing microbes that normally crowd out the dangerous ones. A visibly clean surface is not necessarily a safe one. A visibly colonized surface is not necessarily dangerous, but your eyes would not know that, and neither would your instincts. Week 1. The food industry would be the first major system to break. Not because food became more dangerous, because it became visible. Every surface in every kitchen, every restaurant, every supermarket has always looked exactly like this. The cutting board, the serving spoon, the hands of the person who packed your lunch. None of it changed, only your ability to see it did. And yet the knowledge, made visible and impossible to ignore, would be enough. Restaurant dining would fall by an estimated 80% within the first week, based on how sharply food sales dropped during periods of heightened public awareness of contamination. And those were cases where people only read about risk, not saw it with their own eyes. Supermarkets would face a crisis not of supply, but of perception. Food that was perfectly safe would go untouched because it had been handled. The psychologist Paul Rosen at the University of Pennsylvania has spent decades studying disgust, and his findings are striking. Disgust, unlike fear, does not respond to reassurance. You can tell a person that a piece of food is completely safe, and if it triggers their disgust response, they will still refuse to eat it. The response is not rational. It is ancient, and it is almost impossible to override with information alone. In a world where every germ is visible, disgust would become the dominant human emotion. And disgust, at scale, dismantles civilization faster than almost anything else. Month 1. Here is the thing that almost nobody would predict. Mental health services would be overwhelmed not by people who were physically ill, but by people who were completely healthy and could not cope with what they were seeing. There is a real condition called mysophobia, an intense, irrational fear of contamination and germs. It affects around 5% of the population. In a world where every microbe is visible, the entire population would be living inside the subjective experience of a mysophobia sufferer. The intrusive thoughts, the compulsive avoidance, the inability to touch surfaces without distress. These would not be symptoms of illness. They would be the rational response to what your eyes were showing you. The psychiatrist Paul Salkowskis has described how contamination fear works in the brain. Once a surface is mentally tagged as contaminated, no amount of cleaning fully removes that tag. The fear persists even after the threat is gone. Scale that to a world where the contamination is always visible and never fully gone, and you have a population in a state of permanent, unresolvable anxiety. Year 1. The scientists who study microbiomes would become the most important communicators on Earth. Because the crucial piece of information, the thing that would determine whether human civilization adapted or collapsed, is the distinction between harmful and harmless, between the microbe that kills and the microbe that keeps you alive. And that distinction is invisible to the naked eye, even when the microbe itself is not. A world that could see every germ would need, urgently, to learn to read what it was seeing. Color coding systems, real-time identification overlays, education programs teaching every child not just that germs exist, but what each category of germ actually does. It would be the biggest public health education challenge in human history. But it would also be the first time in history that every human being was genuinely motivated to learn microbiology. And somewhere in that shift, from blind ignorance to anxious visibility to genuine understanding, something important would happen. You would stop being afraid of your own body. The 1.5 trillion microorganisms on your skin right now are not a contamination. They are a community. They have been with you since the moment you were born. They will be with you until the moment you are not. You touched your face 11 times in the last hour, and every single time the microbes already living on your skin were the first line of defense against the ones that were not. You were never as unprotected as you thought. You just couldn't see who was protecting you.